everybody. It's Hallie Hara. Thank you for joining me. Today's topic is learning and growing from feedback. So I've put another hat on and I'm spending a lot of time looking at experiential learning with a specific focus on externships. So I'm hoping that the new content I'm creating will be able to help you to get the most from your externships. Feedback is such an important skill, an important topic for soon-to-be lawyers. So I decided to welcome you with an embarrassing picture of myself, or I don't know what's more embarrassing, the picture or the current picture shows you what, some 20 years can do down the road from law school. But this was me when I was sitting in your shoes. This was the day of my law school graduation. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my own experience with externships and also volunteer internships as well. So in law school, I was the self-proclaimed queen of the unpaid job. I tried all different kinds of things on because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And it actually started before then. It started in high school. So for my senior project, I worked at a small firm. And just to see if I would like the environment and if I liked the day-to-day work of a lawyer. And I liked it enough that in college, I was a pre-law major and I worked at the public defender's office as an intern there to learn about their work. And then between college and law school, I worked for a nonprofit. And that nonprofit had a legal department, and I learned a whole lot there too. But it wasn't until law school that I had my first true externship experience, where I worked at a job in exchange for law school credit that was authorized by the ABA. And that first experience was after my first year working for the United States District Court. And I will say, it was a really, really interesting experience. I loved it. Every judge runs their chambers a little bit differently, but the late John Manos, which is who I externed for, would have us come in on Saturdays and work through NETA problems with him because he was really interested in evidence. And so it really had an impression on me, that experience. But then I wanted to see something else. So I interned at the U.S. Attorney's Office and went on to extern yet again for now the Sixth Circuit, so I could see the appellate side of things. And some of that related to my future work. I did end up being a judicial law clerk. The clerkship I got was totally unrelated to my externships. I met the judge for the first time in the interview. And I went on to become a litigator at a large firm. And I'll tell you, I had never worked for a paying law job before I took that litigator position. So, if you are having that sort of feeling of compare and despair, everyone else is summering places and I don't have a summer job, or, if I don't get in now, I'll never get in. That's absolutely not true. I'm living proof. But you'll notice that a lot of my experience was working in the criminal realm, right? Public defender's office, U.S. Attorney's Office. And I really learned, that I didn't have an interest in doing criminal law, and really sometimes using these externship experiences to rule out what you don't want to do is just as valuable as determining what you do want to do. And then, I went on to become a skills professor, which, as an attorney, we're not generally trained educators. And so that was a totally different direction for my career to go in. But all along, since I was a law student in your shoes, I've been a strong believer in the educational power of externships. And that's why I'm talking about this today. That's why I'm in my current role. But I want to tell you what externs are not. Generally speaking, they are not a 14-week interview. that's really not the purpose of an externship. So you might make good contacts and you might have some good networking opportunities, but don't go into your externship with a narrow focus of, I want to get a job here. And so that's what I'll use opportunity for. To me, that's sort of, not maximizing the value of the experience, which is an opportunity for you to try different things. It's an opportunity for you to build your skills in a legal setting. I talked with someone today who said, we were talking through the possibility that someone could go to 3 years of law school and never step foot in a courtroom, never sit at the table for a negotiation. And these experiential learning opportunities, they're just incredible places to build your skills, which is not always, as we know, the focus of a doctrinal class. You should think about the externship as a mutually beneficial relationship. It's a little bit different than, it's not a little bit different. It's a lot different than a part-time job where someone's just paying you to do something and therefore is not necessarily have the same investment in the educational value of whatever you're working on. They're paying you. So if they want to have you run something to the courthouse, and spend your day, doing things like that, it's different, when they're paying you to do that versus that would not be great externship work, because externship work, as required by the ABA, should be similar to the work that's done by a lawyer at your site. So to sum it all up, externships are a rare opportunity to look at the work before you leap, right? Before you decide, oh yes, I want to be a law clerk, to a judge. You can go try that on in an externship. Sometimes you try on things that are things you don't want to do. Let's say you want to be a litigator. So you want to know what the court looks like from the inside out. So again, good opportunity to clerk for a judge or extern for a judge, even though you don't want to clerk. So I really want you to approach externships with the educational lens in mind. And it's impossible to consider the educational lens without thinking about feedback, which is really how we learn. But they don't pull us aside in law school and say, look, when you're working with an extern or when you're working with a younger associate, here's how to provide feedback. It's really kind of that providing the feedback is a skill as much as receiving the feedback is. So at your externship site, you are going to see all types of feedback. It depends on how busy the person is. It depends on their style. So I want you to kind of be on the lookout for feedback, because it could be formal and it could be informal. And here are some examples. So most of my workplaces were sort of traditional in the sense that you got a really marked up copy of whatever document you were working on so that you can go through and make the changes. But sometimes you won't get something that formal. Sometimes it'll be an email or a passing comment in the hall. Hey, thanks, that's just what I needed, right? That's feedback. There are other times where you'll have an opportunity to sit down with someone and they'll walk you through, things you could have improved on, things that you did better. Again, that's a more formal opportunity. And then sometimes you won't get any feedback. Let's say you drafted, a motion to compel for a nonprofit you were working for, and you turn it in and then you go do your thing for 3 days and you're back in the office. You hear, yes, it was filed, but you never got any feedback. Go and look at the docket, see what was actually filed. Sometimes you'll see it's a different document altogether. So they didn't use your draft. It's a good exercise to sit down with what was actually filed and your draft to see how you can improve. So you don't always need to rely on external sources for the feedback. You can use things within your experience to really tell yourself how you did. So just be aware that it comes in many different forms, and that you should take advantage of feedback in all of its forms. So, what the feedback we all want to hear is this feedback. Hey, you're doing great, right? You get the gold star. You're doing a great job. Return of a document with a post-it that says, thank you, great job. And even better, you're brilliant. We feel great about ourselves. And it goes on and on. You're brilliant, you're talented, you're fabulous, you're wonderful. All wonderful things to hear. But when you think about it from where I sit, there's a problem with that feedback. It's great to hear, but it doesn't really help you learn and grow very much. And that's really what externships are about: learning and growing and further developing your skills. So it's this, unique place in our emotions where we want to feel good. So we want to receive feedback like this, but we also want to learn. So just kind of keep that in mind. Take in the good feedback, but odds are, unless you're, some kind of an amazing human being that I fall far short of, you are going to get diverse feedback, some of which is you're great, and some of which is here's some things that you could work on. And the things you can work on, we tend to learn a bit more from those things. Okay, so at the opposite end of the spectrum, I think this is the kind of feedback we fear, right? Someone yelling at us where we just tune it out. It's not given in a respectful manner, and it's feedback that's frankly unwelcome. And so consistent with that, I found this cartoon that says it's a special hearing aid. It filters out criticism and amplifies compliments. While that would be nice, just like the solely positive feedback, there's a problem with this feedback that, again, if it is so negative and not constructive, we're not learning and growing from it, right? And certainly if we have the hearing aids that filter it out, we're not learning and growing from it. So what is the type of feedback that we could learn and grow from? So if you're new to my videos, you may not know that I have a YouTube page and a podcast called the Law School Playbook. And part of that playbook, by definition, has to be experiential learning. But what's very related to experiential learning, and really all of law school and all of lawyering, is your mindset. And so I have a podcast that has a short series, just these 4 episodes, called the Mind Matters series. And you'll see the topics here. There's being aware of your mindset, the idea of persistence, the idea of grit and resilience, and then the evolution and, some of the self-talk that we do for ourselves as lawyers, along with habit forming. So, these are real short episodes. You can find them on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and I've also posted them, as you can see, on YouTube, but they're audio only on YouTube, fair warning. But I hope that you'll take some time when you're sort of maybe feeling conflicted or just wanting something to listen to, maybe on your commute, to listen to these, because these are the things that we should say in law school, but we don't say all that often. So I want you to be in the right mindset to talk about feedback and to receive feedback. So one of the things that I do in that podcast series, and frankly, all of the podcasts, is that I curate what I feel is really good source material for you to learn. And this doesn't always mean legal documents. Sometimes they're educational psychology. In this instance, something that came to mind, and I did devote an episode to this very popular book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. Um, but something that always stood out to me in this text was the idea of fragile perfects. So Duckworth talks about students who come to college, right? And sometimes even law school, right? We know, never really having experienced failure. So they're high achieving and, sometimes, whether it's helicopter parenting or other resources, they haven't yet had the opportunity, as I like to say, to get knocked around a little bit. And as miserable as that sounds, right? To fail at something, to achieve less than your goals, to not be the high achieving person that you normally are. I think if you look back or can open yourself up to the possibility of maybe not doing your best, you're always going to try your best, but there will be instances where you fall short. You're human. Everybody falls short. I love the Michael Jordan quote where he talks about how many shots he's missed and, how many games he's lost. And because we all need coaching, we all need to be able to improve. So if you identify with the fragile perfect, I want you to try and shift your mindset to really be open to the idea of feedback. And then I liked this. I came across it. You have only failed if you've given up. Until then, it's called learning. And I really believe that that's true. So it's not about talent or fixed intelligence. We know neuroplasticity tells us that your brain can change and learn, and your intelligence changes over time based on the work that you do. And so a growth mindset is really required to learn from your experiences. So just as giving feedback is a skill, receiving feedback is a skill. So I want you to think about that when you're at your sites. Okay, I'm going to improve my skill, right? And this is not about taking things personally. This is about having the skill that I'm going to need in practice. So really, it may help to think about receiving feedback as a skill, because it very much is a skill. And keep in mind that it's about learning. It's not about you personally. It's not about whether you are good enough as a human being. You could be a wonderful human being that has to work on sentence structure. You could be a wonderful human being and a fully formed and, a person with great ideas who maybe needs to go a little bit further with your research. So it's not character defining. And I came across this quote, which I thought was great. There's no pain-free human learning system. We know this from being students, that the most difficult learning is sometimes the most meaningful learning. If it's not difficult, then it probably wasn't that impactful. So you want the goal of all of this to be able to have effective communication. And so that needs to be on your end of it. You want to have healthy communication. There will be instances where the person on the other side of the table is not demonstrating healthy communication, but that should always be the goal. So how do you use feedback for learning growth? We've talked about feedback that's not helpful for that. Now let's talk about what is. So, we talked about this, but in order to get that feedback, you need to be mindful of it, be on the lookout for it, and also actively seek it. Say, hey, I would love if you have time, some feedback on, what I wrote. If people don't always think to give it to you. We talked about comparing the final product. Ask questions and ask for examples. So if you are sitting down with someone and, they've sort of given you so much information, you feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, it's okay to say, okay, well, if there were, kind of the two biggest takeaways that I could have from this work, things that you've identified that I need to work on, what would those two things be, right? If someone's talking about something and you're really not getting it, say, you know what, I would love to see an example of that if you happen to have one, right? And then be reflective. So a lot of the feedback happens when you're done with the communication with the other person. I teach legal writing, and one of the things I talk about is there is an opportunity to not make the same mistake twice. And that's done by keeping a list. If you get feedback from a partner that you work with often, from a site supervisor for your externship, and you know that person loves the Oxford comma, or you know that person uses certain words. I worked for a judge who liked the phrase "at bottom." I never used that phrase before I worked for her, but I noticed she changed it and added it a few times. So I added that to my list. So keep track of the feedback that you can, so that before you turn in your next assignment, you can avoid those mistakes that you've made already. But the good news is this: if we're open to it, if we work on this skill, there is research that shows the more we improve at the skill of receiving feedback, the greater our job satisfaction. So when you think about it that way, in a field that's, people struggle with mental health and substance abuse, and being a lawyer is a wonderful, noble profession, but it also comes at a high cost sometimes. But if you could do this one thing, particularly in your beginning years, that will boost your job satisfaction, because data tells us it does, then by all means, take the gift of feedback, because it will really help you in your career. So when we're processing feedback, Dr. Shanita Williams talks, I love these two images. These are images that I put to her words, but she says, use a strainer and not a sponge when you're processing feedback. So you picture the sponge, the kitchen sponge, everything kind of stays in it unless it's wrung out, right? The strainer, on the other hand, not everything's getting through. So I want you to think about those images and decide that you can take some of the feedback and not necessarily all of it. But the key is not to decide too soon, right? So if you're getting feedback that sounds terrible to you, or doesn't sound, it's contrary to what you were told by your legal writing professor, for example, or that someone is wrong about the law because you've looked at the law, our tendency is to want to shut off and not let any of the feedback in. But there may be a few good nuggets in there that you can mine out. So you can be selective about the feedback that you receive. And if you think about this, we do this all the time in life. We don't take everybody's unsolicited advice or even solicited advice. When I was putting this together, I was thinking about, I was a young associate at a big law firm, and I was in the elevator, quite pregnant, and drinking a Starbucks hot chocolate. And a partner got on the elevator with me and she said, "You're drinking coffee? There's caffeine in that." Because I'm pregnant. She was obviously judging me for it. And I said, "No, it's actually hot chocolate." And she said, "Well, there's caffeine in that too." And I just ignored it. I enjoyed my hot chocolate and went about my day. And I didn't take that particular advice. So we do this in our lives all the time. So while you want to be respectful, you don't necessarily have to take all the feedback, but you want to make sure to get the pieces that are really helpful to you, the things that do resonate with you. So stay open-minded, even if you hear things like, "Don't drink hot chocolate while you're pregnant." All right. So professor Professor Sheila Heen, she's at Harvard. She's actually a law professor, but she's written some books on, she's a co-author of some popular books on difficult conversations and another one called Thanks for the Feedback. She talks about some variables that the research has shown, kind of influence your interaction with feedback. So she talks about the importance of just knowing yourself, right? And this knowing yourself will sort of lend you an extra edge in being able to deal with the feedback that you're given. So this is, I don't think it's necessarily solely her thought. I've heard of this idea of a baseline also as a set point in the relevant literature, but basically what your baseline or set point is what is your mood generally, right? Are you a glass half empty or half full person? There's not a right answer to this. Not everybody is glass half full or glass full, no matter the circumstances, right? There are those really positive people that exist, but I'm going to confess to you right now, I'm not one of them. My set point tends to be a little lower. I would put myself in more of the half empty category, kind of always waiting for the other shoe to drop, a little bit of a nervous personality. And so knowing that, it doesn't mean it's good or it's bad. It's just a matter of knowing yourself is important because that will inform how you take information in. So a good example is my student evaluations. I love working with students. I love my job. I love teaching. It really, I feel like, is a good fit for me. And it's something that I'm very passionate about. But every semester, I'll get that one or two students who have a little nitpick about something I did. And sometimes they're nasty about it. And I could get a whole pile of positive evaluations, positive feedback, but I'll fixate on that one or two that are quite negative, right? So if your set point, like mine, is a little low, the volume on the positive feedback is going to be turned down. The volume on the negative feedback will be turned way up. So just sort of be aware of it and try and keep yourself in check. And then she talks about swing. Okay, so we know what your baseline is. How far does the positive or negative feedback knock you off your baseline? So you may be a half full person generally, but the feedback kind of knocks you, way into a not so great place, right? So really taking note of, how do I react to this? What is my feeling? Am I able to be a good listener? Am I able to be objective? Am I able to take this in? Or is it just very emotionally difficult for me? So figure out what your swing is, and then also figure out your recovery time. So she defines that as how long it takes for you to come back to baseline after you've received positive or negative feedback. How long does being happy last, right? How long does the negative feedback last? And to me, once you've recovered is when the learning occurs. So those of you who know me know that I have a background in academic success. So I tend to work with students sometimes when they are at their absolute lowest point. They've just failed a course. They're on the verge of failing out of law school, for example. I've really been through some difficult times with my students. But the worst time for me to give them feedback on their performance is right after they've received their grades, because they are so far off their baseline and they haven't recovered yet in order to do the learning, right? So if you are someone who notes that you swing greatly, right, and you got some piece of paper back with comments all over it and you're finding it overwhelming, don't rush right in and talk to your site supervisor then. Wait, sit with the feedback, think about it, right? Use the strainer to pick out the pieces you think are really valuable. And then once you've recovered, maybe go and talk about it, right? So these are all things that you should be aware of, just because as human beings, we tend to sometimes distort things in our mind, right? A partner may have written something, or a site supervisor may have written something that you are viewing and saying in your head so harshly. And you may go talk to that person later on, and they didn't intend anything like that, right? So try and be as objective about the feedback as you can. So think about, the greats like Simone Biles, right? Simone Biles doesn't go on, in the gym and say, I know everything, right? She's still coached, right? So even people that have wonderful skills, still need this feedback. So kind of try to look at it through that lens and see it objectively. The best thing about being a lawyer, in my opinion, is that you never stop learning. It's a job where you can become a lifelong learner. And you know what that means? Since we learn through feedback and struggle and sometimes failure, you're going to continue to have these things that will be obstacles that you'll have to overcome. The law changes, technology changes, the clients, the type of matters in front of you, and your clients change. And so you have to be open to this process. This is just the beginning of getting feedback that's going to help you be a lifelong learner. So be receptive to it. I know we didn't get a ton of it in law school, but this is why experiential learning is so important, because you do get that feedback. And just remember, you may have doubts. You're human. There are times where you'll struggle with feedback. Hopefully, after watching this video, you will have a slightly different take on it. But just remember, I really believe in you. I think you can do it, and I'll always be rooting for you. Thanks.